Everyone knows the story of David and Goliath, a shepherd boy, a giant, a sling, a stone. But what if I told you that nearly everything you were taught about this battle is incomplete? This was never just a story about a boy defeating a giant. This was the moment God revealed how he builds kings, not through politics, not through military training, but on a battlefield where an entire army was frozen in fear. David didn't just slay a giant that day. He killed fear itself. What you're about to discover will change how you see this story forever. Because the real battle in that valley wasn't between David and Goliath. It was between faith and everything that tries to destroy it. Picture a narrow valley cutting between two ridgelines in ancient Israel, the Valley of Elah. On one side, the Philistine army, trained, organized, ruthless. On the other, the army of Israel, God's chosen people, trembling behind their shields. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were greatly afraid. For 40 straight days, a 9-foot warrior named Goliath walked into that valley every morning and every evening, screaming the same challenge. Send me one man to fight, and we will settle this. Nobody moved, not one soldier, not one general, not even King Saul, the tallest man in all of Israel, the one anointed to protect his people. He sat in his tent, paralyzed. Fear consumed them all. And here's what most people miss about this scene. This wasn't just a military standoff. In the ancient world, when a champion challenged your army and nobody answered, it meant your God was weaker than their God. Every day Goliath showed up, he wasn't just mocking Israel. He was mocking the living God. But God was already preparing his answer, and nobody saw it coming. Miles away from that battlefield, in a small town called Bethlehem, a teenager was doing the one job nobody else wanted: watching sheep. David was the youngest of 8 sons, and in that culture, the youngest was practically invisible. When the prophet Samuel came to Jesse's house to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse didn't even bother calling David inside. Forgotten. Think about that. Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" And Jesse essentially replied, "Well, there's the youngest, but he's just out watching sheep." He was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. God told Samuel to anoint him immediately. But here's the part that should shake you. God does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. The one everyone overlooked was the one God had chosen. Rejected by men, chosen by God. Maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you've been passed over, underestimated, forgotten in a corner somewhere. Remember this: David was anointed king while still smelling like sheep. And the battle that would prove it was already waiting for him in a valley he hadn't even heard of yet. 40 days. In Scripture, the number 40 is never accidental. 40 days of rain in Noah's flood, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days of Jesus' temptation, and now 40 days of Goliath's mockery. Every sunrise brought the same humiliation. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall. His armor weighed 125 pounds. The iron point of his spear alone weighed 15 pounds. He was a killing machine. And every morning and every evening, he screamed across that valley, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Choose a man and have him come down to me." But what made this so devastating wasn't just the giant's size. It was what his presence did to God's people. Saul offered his own daughter in marriage and a lifetime of tax-free living to whoever defeated Goliath. Nobody took the deal. The reward was enormous, the fear greater. If this story of faith against impossible odds is resonating with you, hit like and subscribe for more biblical wisdom that transforms. Because what David does next will completely change how you understand courage. And it has nothing to do with being brave. When David arrived at the camp to bring food to his brothers, he heard Goliath's challenge for the first time. And his reaction stunned everyone. He wasn't afraid. He was angry, outraged. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David saw what no one else could see. This wasn't a military problem. It was a spiritual offense. His own brothers mocked him. Eliab, the oldest, said he was arrogant, that he just came to watch the battle. Even his own family tried to silence him. But when David stood before Saul and volunteered, he revealed something extraordinary. "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. In the lonely fields, with no audience, no cameras, no applause, David had fought a lion and a bear with his bare hands to protect his father's sheep. The battles nobody sees prepare you for the victories everybody remembers. Private battles build public victories. God doesn't waste your wilderness seasons. Every quiet struggle is training for the moment your name gets called. But the way David prepared for this fight reveals something most people completely miss. Saul tried to dress David in his own armor, royal armor, the best Israel had. Helmet of bronze, coat of mail, sword. David put it on, walked around, and took it all off. He said simply, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." This is one of the most profound moments in the entire Bible. David refused to fight with someone else's weapons. He refused to adopt someone else's strategy. You cannot defeat your giant wearing someone else's armor. Then he did something that seemed insane. He went to a brook and picked up 5 smooth stones, not random rocks. Smooth stones, shaped by years of water flowing over them, polished by time and pressure. Shaped by pressure and polished by time, just like God does with us. Why 5 stones? Some scholars point out that Goliath had 4 brothers. David was prepared for whatever came next. Shaped by pressure, polished by time. David wasn't being reckless. He was being strategic with radical faith. He used what God had given him, not what the world offered him. And that made all the difference in what happened next. What David shouted at Goliath before the fight is the most overlooked speech in all of Scripture, and it might be the most powerful declaration of faith ever recorded. Goliath looked at David and despised him. He cursed David by his gods. He sneered, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" The giant saw a child and laughed. But David's response was not a scared boy's trembling words. It was a prophetic declaration that shook the spiritual realm. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David didn't just talk about winning. He described in detail what would happen. "I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and wild animals." Prophetic. Faith speaks before victory arrives. David didn't speak based on what he could see. He spoke based on who his God was. This is the pattern Scripture shows us over and over. Faith declares the outcome before the battle is decided. And the battle that followed lasted only seconds. The moment itself was shockingly fast. David ran toward Goliath, not away, not cautiously. He sprinted straight at the giant. Charged. He reached into his bag, pulled out a single stone, loaded his sling, and released. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant fell face down on the ground. One stone, one shot, one God. But here's something remarkable that most sermons skip entirely. After Goliath fell, David didn't have a sword. The text says he ran to the giant, took Goliath's own sword, and used it to cut off his head. The weapon meant to destroy God's people became the instrument of their deliverance. That's not just a battle detail. That's a pattern of God. He takes the very thing the enemy intended for your destruction and turns it into the tool of your victory. As the great preacher Charles Spurgeon once reflected, God is too good to be unkind, and he is too wise to be mistaken. And when we cannot trace his hand, we must trust his heart. Enemy's weapon becomes God's instrument. The Philistines, who had been screaming for 40 days, saw their champion fall. And what happened after that single stone changed an entire nation forever. The immediate aftermath of Goliath's death triggered a chain reaction that changed Israel forever. The Philistine army fled in terror. Israel pursued them all the way to the gates of Ekron and Gath, plundering their camp. The men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines. One boy's faith ignited an entire nation's courage. But something else happened that day that's equally important. Jonathan, Saul's own son and heir to the throne, saw David and made a covenant with him on the spot. Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped off his royal robe, his armor, even his sword and bow, and gave them all to David. The prince of Israel was voluntarily handing his inheritance to a shepherd boy. The prince bowed to the shepherd. Jonathan recognized what his own father refused to see, that God's hand was on David. The women of Israel came out singing, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." And that single song would set in motion something far more dangerous than any giant, because the man who should have celebrated David's victory heard those words and was consumed by a force more destructive than Goliath ever was. Saul's response to David's triumph reveals one of the darkest patterns in human nature. Instead of celebrating, Saul seethed. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, but me with only thousands. From that day forward, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. He threw spears at him twice while David played the harp. He sent David on suicide missions, secretly hoping the Philistines would kill him. He hunted David through the wilderness for years like an animal. The man who should have been David's greatest mentor became his greatest enemy. Victory brought not peace, but persecution. But here's the part that reveals David's true character. Twice, David had the perfect opportunity to kill Saul. In a cave at En-Gedi and in Saul's camp at night, David crept close enough to end it all. Both times he refused. "I will not lay my hand on the Lord's anointed." David understood something that most people never learn. Killing Goliath took courage, but not killing Saul, that took character. God wasn't just preparing David for a throne, he was preparing David's heart to sit on it. David didn't become king the day he killed Goliath. He became king roughly 15 years later. 15 years of running, hiding, fighting, crying out to God in caves and deserts. 1. The valley taught him courage. 2. The wilderness taught him patience. 3. The betrayals taught him mercy. 4. The waiting taught him trust. Every psalm David wrote during those desperate years became scripture that millions still pray today. As David himself declared in the midst of his darkest season, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." The shepherd boy who protected his sheep with a sling became the shepherd king who protected his nation with faith. The boy who trusted God with a stone became the king who trusted God with a kingdom. And this is why this story still matters to you right now. Your giant is your doorway. Whatever stands in front of you today, the fear, the doubt, the impossible situation everyone else has run from, that's your valley of Allah. God never wastes a battle, and he never promotes someone who hasn't been tested. You don't need Saul's armor. You don't need anyone's permission. You need 5 smooth stones and a God who has never lost a fight. David walked into the valley of Allah as a forgotten shepherd boy and walked out as the man who would become the greatest king Israel ever knew. But the battle didn't make him a king. It revealed the king God had already been building in the quiet, unseen, overlooked places of his life. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. If you made it this far, comment 5 stones if you're ready to face your giant with faith and not with fear. Stay in the Word, stay in the Spirit, and watch what God does.